You had to kill him. The boy cries, you sweat her tears, and you kill him.
Let me preface this by saying, The Last of Us is my favorite video game of all time. Everything from the writing, to the gameplay, to the music, it's all stellar. Each story beat is engaging, and it all builds up to a finale that is striking in how it reminds us that we're all human at the end of the day. This game was so groundbreaking and finite to me that I knew a sequel would never be necessary. So I just beat the sequel, and it's great. And it's sad to see the hate boner people have for this game because some story spoilers leaked out. I genuinely believe it's the kind of story you need to sit through from start to finish to truly understand why it's so effective. You can't just read some plot points and proclaim you have divine knowledge of why this game sucks. Now, is the story better than the first game? No, most certainly not. But merely attempting to follow up the story of The Last of Us is a Herculean task from the get-go. So would it really be fair to expect that from them? Kind of, actually. I'm not gonna... Where the story falters the most is in its pacing. The first half of this story is kind of a drag, and it presents itself as a very simple, shallow revenge story. Revenge stories are the oldest ones in the book, and as a huge fan of The Last of Us with how complex that story is, seeing the sequel take such a traditional story was so disappointing. The first half of this game is not a bad revenge story by any means, it's just okay. And to say the story of a sequel to the greatest storyline in video games is just okay is a very bad first impression. The game's pacing sours the first half because it doesn't keep the ball rolling like the first game does. The Last of Us 1 does a remarkable job at investing the player from moment one. It introduces you to Joel and his daughter and then goes boom, zombies, and then boom, your daughter's dead. And then Joel's like, no! And then you start crying because you're just like Joel and you go, no! And that's just the opening. The rest of the game keeps throwing interesting characters and short stories your way during this cross-country zombie-infested road trip. And just when you get comfortable, the writers scream at you and swerve the story in new directions, always keeping you on your toes. And you're sitting there with your stupid, ugly-looking face, and you're going, no! The Last of Us Part 2's first half does not do that. The game has a hard time keeping you engaged because of its simpler story and slower pace. One reason the game has this problem is because the first half has long stretches of Ellie on her own. This means there's not as much opportunity to explore our characters' relationships during the gameplay. To further explain, in the first game, Joel and Ellie are always by each other's side. They're always talking to each other and reacting to the environment that they're in, which enhances the quiet moments between combat sections. Even in Naughty Dog's previous Uncharted games, you're always with a companion or two to have witty banter with, which keeps the story interesting. I'm not trying to say nothing compelling happens in the first half of the game. Some of the most interesting stuff in the entire video game comes in the first half via flashbacks. Yep, it's a non-linear story, so get your corkboards ready. We're gonna try to link everything. These flashbacks take place within the 5 years between the first game and this game, and bring up really interesting plot points that are rooted in the first game. The writing going on in the flashbacks is so good that it makes you wonder why the story doesn't just take place then. Furthermore, these flashbacks are far too spread out, and some take place in very odd points of the story. This causes issues where the audience is being dangled with plot points that won't move forward until countless hours later in the game. It's basically narrative cock-blocking. The flashbacks could benefit from being rearranged to keep the audience more engaged. Now, it may sound like I'm hating on this game. I prefer the word critiquing, but I do still love this game. You may be wondering why I still think it's great, and at this point in the game, I was wondering the same thing. How could this game be getting 10s across the board when the story comes off as simple and disjointed? But the game truly takes a turn once you hit the halfway point. I was questioning a lot of the choices being made, but once the halfway point comes, the story completely shifts for the better, and everything comes into frame. The pacing really picks up, and the simple story that was introduced in the first half becomes way more complex, and it finally feels like a worthy successor to The Last of Us. Now let me stop for a second. I'll be the first one to admit, it's never a good thing to hear someone sell you on a video game with the phrase, "It gets good 10 hours in." But The Last of Us Part 2 does get good 10 hours in. Now, I'm not going to excuse the first half of this game. You do have to go through the game with questionable confidence to get to the good parts, which is always going to be a hard sell. But when The Last of Us Part 2 picks up, it really shines. It's at this point that the narrative themes start poking through, and the message is wonderfully conveyed. It transforms its simple story of revenge into another one of gaming's greatest. The Last of Us Part 2 has one of the most ambitious stories I've seen in a video game, and I'm a Metal Gear Solid fan. That ambition does cause it to stumble at times, but the story sticks its landing so well, and it perfectly accomplishes what it aims to do. I never thought that we needed a sequel to The Last of Us. And honestly, I still don't think we needed this sequel, but nonetheless, I'm happy the story exists, and it's definitely worth your time. Oh, I wanted to talk about the gameplay. It's good. It's good. It's more Last of Us gameplay. Bye. But they added this revolutionary new edition, alright? One that took 7 years and an entire console generation to develop. You ready for this? You ready? Ready for what they did to The Last of Us gameplay? They let you go on your stomach. Yes. Yes. Boys, we got him. Now you can go prone, which honestly sounds like nothing. But when you actually play it, it opens up the gameplay a lot. Like, no jokes. With going prone, you can hide in the tall grass or hide under cars, which gives the combat more versatility and adds to that never-ending sense of struggle that the first game's combat excelled at. They also add new enemies to the game, which force you to approach combat encounters differently, like dogs that can follow your scent, or new infected that spit acid or stalk you. If it sounds like there's not much to talk about with the combat, that's because there really isn't much. The combat is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but it is near identical to the first game with these minor tweaks I just mentioned. But hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you had this game spoiled for you, I still hope you go out and play it, because the spoilers without the context don't really capture what the experience of this game is. If people go through this game from start to finish and still hate it, that's fine and completely fair. But for people to be crapping on a video game like this and calling it the worst video game ever made without actually experiencing it for yourself, I don't believe you have a valid point of view on this game. Also, please, stop going after the creators of this game and sending them death threats and all this hateful messages just because you don't like the game they made. I can't believe I have to add this part into the video. It should be simple and obvious. Just don't be an bow 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 bow.